The exchange began in the middle of what had seemed like a standard televised panel, polished introductions, a carefully moderated discussion, and participants sticking to familiar talking points. Jasmine Crockett had been answering a policy question, speaking in her characteristic straightforward style, when Ivanka Trump leaned slightly forward, her voice smooth and deliberate, to draw a contrast between her own background and Jasmine's. She spoke about real leadership in a way that felt personal, threading her comment with an implication that experience came only through the kind of circle she herself had moved in. It was subtle enough to pass as a political jab, but clear enough for anyone paying attention to catch the personal edge. The audience reacted with soft laughter, nothing wild, just the kind of knowing chuckles you hear when someone believes they've landed a point in their favor. Jasmine didn't rush to respond. She didn't shift in her seat, didn't give away any sign that the remark had rattled her. Instead, she looked directly at Ivanka for a moment, almost as if weighing whether to even acknowledge the jab. And then, in a calm, measured tone, she said, "I'd rather have no experience in nepotism than decades of practice in it." The delivery was almost disarmingly even, there was no raised voice, no hint of hostility. But the weight of the sentence hung in the air in a way that cut through the usual rhythm of political debate. The shift in the room was immediate. Laughter gave way to a stunned hush, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The moderator, who had been glancing down at his cards, looked up sharply, as if unsure whether to intervene or just let the moment stand. One of the camera operators visibly raised his eyebrows, while a man in the front row, someone who had been smiling through much of Ivanka's commentary, suddenly sat back in his chair, lips pressed together. The brilliance of the moment wasn't in the sharpness of the line alone, it was in how Jasmine handled it. She didn't smirk or lean back in satisfaction, and she didn't press further to make it a bigger scene. She simply let the words settle where they landed and then moved directly back into the policy discussion. She began outlining her views on economic reform, speaking as though the comeback had been nothing more than another point in her argument. This controlled shift back to substance made her statement even more powerful. It showed that she hadn't just come to spar, she came to set the record straight and then get back to work. That control is what made the unexpected shift in tone so memorable. In the usual back and forth of political panels, moments like this often spiral into loud exchanges or drawn-out arguments, but this one didn't. Instead, it was a surgical strike, swift, precise, and entirely contained. The lack of theatrics forced the audience to focus on the content of the words, and in doing so, they realized that the remark wasn't just a personal jab, it was also a critique of the political pathways that privilege can open for some while remaining closed to others. Even those who might have disagreed with Jasmine's politics couldn't deny that the response had clarity. It didn't rely on insults or theatrics, it relied on truth delivered without embellishment. The shock came from the fact that she said it plainly, on live television, in front of someone known for being composed and unshaken in public appearances. People watching at home later described it as the line you didn't see coming, because Jasmine hadn't been combative in tone leading up to it. The contrast between what Ivanka likely expected and what actually happened is what made the exchange stick. Ivanka had probably anticipated a defensive answer or perhaps even a deflection, but instead she was met with a sentence that both addressed the remark and reframed the discussion. In that moment, the conversation stopped being about who had more leadership experience and became about what kind of experience actually matters and who gets to claim it. This was the point at which the energy in the studio shifted decisively. No one interrupted Jasmine as she continued her points, but the audience's focus had been completely redirected. Even the moderator's voice, when he eventually moved on to the next topic, carried a different tone, as if he too was adjusting to the altered dynamic. And perhaps the most telling part was that the unexpected shift didn't just change the room, it changed how the rest of the segment played out. The balance of attention moved toward Jasmine, not because she had raised her voice or demanded it, but because she had taken control of the narrative in a single, calm sentence. It was the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to dominate the conversation to own it. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her response, the atmosphere inside the studio changed in a way that everyone could feel. Up until then, the discussion had been moving along with predictable energy, light applause here and there, a few murmurs from the audience whenever a point landed. But after her words, "I'd rather have no experience in nepotism than decades of practice in it," the reaction was immediate and unfiltered. It wasn't just that people were surprised, it was that they didn't quite know how to react at first. For a fraction of a second, there was complete stillness. Then it happened. A collective gasp, soft but distinct, rippled through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The sound wasn't the kind of loud cheer or boo that usually fills these events, it was quieter, sharper, and far more telling. It signaled that what had just been said wasn't ordinary debate material. It was a statement that struck closer to the bone, and the audience knew it. The reaction wasn't uniform. In the front rows, a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man in a tailored suit, who had earlier been nodding along with Ivanka's remarks, suddenly leaned back, folding his arms, his expression frozen between surprise and disapproval. Nearby, a woman with a small notepad paused mid-scribble, her pen hovering over the page as if she wasn't sure whether to keep taking notes or just watch what was unfolding. The most interesting part was how the energy seemed to pull away from Ivanka without anyone saying another word. She adjusted her posture, trying to maintain her trademark calm, but the audience's attention had already drifted. They weren't looking at her anymore, they were locked on Jasmine, as if waiting to see what she would say next. The moderator glanced at his cue cards and then at the cameras, clearly aware that this was the kind of moment that could define an entire broadcast. In live television, audience reactions can make or break the perception of a conversation. Here, the gasps and the sudden silence didn't just make Jasmine's words stand out, they cemented them. The studio had gone from a place where two high-profile figures were sharing the spotlight to a space where one voice had completely captured the room. The tension was thick enough to be felt even through the screen for viewers at home. Some people in the crowd tried to suppress smiles, as if they didn't want to be seen reacting too strongly. Others leaned toward their neighbors to whisper comments, though the quiet chatter only lasted a few seconds before attention swung back to the stage. A younger man in the back row actually mouthed wow to no one in particular, his eyes fixed on Jasmine. It wasn't just the remark itself that caused this. It was how cleanly it was delivered. The lack of dramatic tone made it harder to dismiss as a rehearsed one-liner. Instead, it came across as an unshaken truth, the kind of thing that hits harder because it doesn't sound like it was said for applause. That authenticity magnified the audience's reaction. They weren't clapping out of politeness, they were processing. Even the sound crew, tucked away along the wall, seemed to register the weight of the moment. One of them glanced up from his control panel toward the stage, as if to confirm he'd heard it correctly. The cameraman operating the close-up shot on Ivanka kept his lens steady, but you could tell by the slight adjustment that he was tracking the changing expressions. The longer the silence lasted, the more it became clear that this was one of those rare live TV exchanges where the audience wasn't just an observer, they were a participant in the moment. Their collective intake of breath and their locked-in attention reinforced the impact of what had just been said. It turned a single sentence into a centerpiece of the broadcast. When the moderator finally spoke again, his tone carried a subtle caution, as if he knew he was steering the show back on track after an unscripted shift. But the room still felt different. Every new comment from Jasmine was met with sharper focus, while Ivanka's remarks, no matter how polished, didn't generate the same energy they had before. The balance of engagement had tipped, and it had tipped because the audience had instinctively recognized the significance of the moment they just witnessed. Even after the cameras moved on, you could feel the lingering effect. People in the audience weren't quite ready to move past it. They glanced at each other, exchanged knowing looks, and, in some cases, shook their heads with that half-smiling disbelief people have when they know they'll be talking about something for days. That reaction, unprompted and unrehearsed, was proof that the moment had left an imprint deeper than any planned talking point could. Ivanka Trump had built a public image on composure, measured words, practiced smiles, and a steady tone that rarely cracked, even under criticism. That's why the subtle change in her demeanor after Jasmine Crockett's remark stood out so much. The moment the words left Jasmine's mouth, "I'd rather have no experience in nepotism than decades of practice in it," there was a brief flicker in Ivanka's expression. It was small, just the slightest pause before she blinked, her smile faltering in a way that those in the studio and watching on camera could catch if they were paying close attention. For someone used to controlling the narrative, being caught off guard on live television is never ideal. The cameras didn't cut away, so viewers could see her fingers adjust the edge of her notes, almost as though she needed a quick distraction to regain her rhythm. She tilted her head slightly, the kind of gesture that could be read as either considering her response or searching for the safest way to move forward without drawing more attention to what had just been said. The moderator's eyes darted between them, sensing the shift but not stepping in right away. Ivanka glanced down for a moment longer than usual before looking back up, her posture still upright but missing the easy confidence she'd had minutes earlier. She tried to return the discussion to policy, picking up on a point about economic growth, but the change in energy was unmistakable. People in the audience noticed it too. In the third row, a man in a navy blazer leaned forward, watching Ivanka intently as if to see whether she would address the comment directly or sidestep it. A woman seated near him shook her head slowly, almost as though she couldn't believe what she'd just seen. No one laughed now, and the subdued quiet made Ivanka's careful tone seem even more deliberate. For someone like her, accustomed to speaking in environments where she could manage the pace and flow, this was a rare moment where the control slipped. The impact wasn't that she had no answer, but that she didn't have one instantly ready that would land with equal force. Live TV doesn't allow for long pauses, yet she took an extra breath before continuing, choosing her next words with visible caution. The shift didn't just affect her speech, it also showed in her body language. She had started the segment leaning slightly forward in her chair, an open and confident position. Now she was sitting a bit straighter, hands more tightly clasped on her lap, her movements smaller and more contained. It wasn't a collapse by any means, but it was a contraction, a pulling back from the assertive posture she'd held earlier. On the cameras, the contrast was clear. Viewers at home began commenting on social media almost instantly, noting the difference between her demeanor before and after the remark. Some described it as the moment she lost the room. Others simply posted side-by-side screenshots, showing the subtle shift in her smile and gaze. The internet, of course, has a way of amplifying these visual cues, but even in the studio, people felt the change firsthand. The moderator eventually redirected the conversation to another topic, giving Ivanka space to speak without circling back to Jasmine's point. She used the opportunity to rebuild her footing, speaking in the same polished manner she was known for, but the earlier moment lingered in the background. Every time the camera cut to her, there was a faint awareness that the dynamic between the two women had shifted. For Jasmine, the effect was immediate. Without raising her voice or altering her pace, she now had the advantage of holding the audience's full attention. Every comment she made after that was received with sharper focus. For Ivanka, regaining that spotlight would have required either an equally sharp counter or a total reframing of the discussion, neither of which happened in that segment. What made it so striking was that this wasn't a loud confrontation. It wasn't about shouting someone down or dominating the conversation with force. It was about a single sentence altering the balance of presence in the room. And in that shift, Ivanka's momentary lapse in composure became part of the story. The fact that it was so subtle, so quick, only made it more noticeable to those paying close attention. Her reaction didn't undo her professionalism, she still answered questions and maintained her polished tone, but it revealed something rarely seen, that even the most practiced public figures can be caught off guard, and when they are, the camera catches everything. The people in the room didn't need to hear her admit she was unsettled. They could see it. And once the audience senses the change, it becomes the undercurrent to every. The moment between Jasmine Crockett and Ivanka Trump didn't stay confined to the studio, it began spreading online almost as soon as the words were spoken. While the moderator was still asking the next question, someone in the audience had already clipped the exchange on their phone and uploaded it to social media. Within minutes, the short video, barely 10 seconds long, was making its way across timelines with captions like "She really said that on live TV" and "Jasmine Crockett just ended the conversation." What made the clip so shareable was its simplicity. There was no shouting, no overlapping voices, no chaos, just Jasmine sitting calmly, looking directly at Ivanka, and delivering a single, measured sentence: "I'd rather have no experience in nepotism than decades of practice in it." The camera caught Ivanka's immediate, almost imperceptible reaction, and that frame, her faint pause, the change in her smile, became the image people paired with the quote. The internet thrives on moments that can be boiled down to a sentence and a look, and this one fit perfectly. By the time the show ended and both women had left the stage, the video had already been reposted by major political commentators. Some accounts slowed the footage down,
pointing out the way Ivanka blinked after hearing the line, while others focused entirely on Jasmine's unflinching delivery.
The contrast between the two, one maintaining composure through calm precision, the other visibly taken aback, was irresistible for anyone looking for a viral political moment. News outlets quickly picked it up, embedding the clip in their online articles. Headlines avoided exaggeration but still made it clear that something unusual had happened. Crockett counters Trump on live TV, and unexpected exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Ivanka Trump captivates audience. For viewers who hadn't seen the broadcast live, the clip became their only impression of the segment. And that meant Jasmine's words overshadowed every other part of the conversation. Even late-night talk shows joined in. By the evening, one host played the clip to laughter and applause from their own audience, following it with a joke about how sometimes the quietest moments are the loudest. On political discussion panels, analysts replayed it while dissecting the choice of words, noting how effective it was because it addressed the criticism directly without resorting to insults. Meanwhile, Ivanka's team appeared to recognize how quickly the moment was spreading. Her official accounts didn't mention the exchange, instead posting about unrelated topics. This absence of response only fueled more speculation online. Comment threads filled with people debating whether ignoring the remark was the right move or whether she should have addressed it head-on. For Jasmine, the viral momentum carried its own benefits. Her followers increased noticeably in the hours after the broadcast, with many people sharing her previous speeches and interviews. Supporters framed the moment as proof of her quick thinking and refusal to be diminished, especially in a public forum. Political allies referenced it in their own posts, praising her for delivering what they called the cleanest response in recent memory. The reach of the clip wasn't just limited to people interested in politics. Lifestyle and pop culture pages began sharing it too, framing it as an example of how to deliver a confident comeback without losing professionalism. Commenters compared it to memorable moments in televised history where one sentence became the defining takeaway, long after the rest of the discussion was forgotten. What stood out in all of this was how the viral spread shifted the weight of the original broadcast. Instead of viewers remembering the panel as a balanced exchange between two public figures, most people only remembered the 10-second clip. The rest of the segment, policy points, statistics, detailed answers, was reduced to background noise. In the public conversation, that single exchange became the headline. By the next day, hashtags related to the moment were trending, and journalists were asking Jasmine about it in interviews. She addressed it briefly, saying only that she stands by every word she said, and then pivoted to the issues she wanted to discuss. That decision, refusing to dwell on the moment while it was at its peak online, gave the impression of someone who was confident enough to let the comment speak for itself. In contrast, Ivanka avoided all public mention of it, appearing at a separate event later in the week without taking questions. Reporters still brought it up in coverage of her appearance, underscoring how persistent the clip had become in the news cycle. Even for someone accustomed to shaping media narratives, it was clear this was one of those rare instances where a single unscripted exchange had outpaced every other talking point. By the time the dust settled, it was clear the exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Ivanka Trump had taken on a life of its own. What began as just another segment in a televised discussion had turned into a defining moment, replayed on countless screens and dissected in every corner of the media. The power of it lay not in theatrics, but in the way it unfolded, quietly, directly, and without the excess that often dilutes political exchanges. Jasmine's line didn't just land because of its wording, it landed because of the precision behind it. She had taken a personal jab, flipped it without hostility, and then moved on without lingering. That approach stripped the moment of any sense of pettiness, allowing it to stand purely on its clarity and truth. It was the kind of statement that made people pause, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. For Ivanka, the challenge was different. She entered the discussion with the same poise she was known for, but the shift after the remark was hard to miss. Even if she maintained her professionalism, the pause, the adjustment in her posture, and the careful recalibration of her responses revealed that the comment had broken through her usual defenses. That visibility is what made the moment resonate so deeply with both the studio audience and those watching from home. It showed that even seasoned public figures can be caught off guard in real time. The audience's reaction, both in the studio and online, was the amplifier. The soft gasp, the locked-in attention, the subtle ripples of surprise, all of it fed into the narrative that something unscripted and genuine had occurred. In an era where so much of public discourse feels rehearsed, those fleeting seconds of authenticity became magnetic. People didn't just watch the clip. They replayed it, analyzed it, and shared it as an example of how to meet a challenge without losing composure.
Social media ensured the exchange would live far beyond its original broadcast.
Within hours, it had been trimmed into shareable segments, paired with captions, and spread across platforms. Supporters of Jasmine championed it as a victory for quick wit and confidence, while critics of Ivanka pointed to it as proof that her polished image could be disrupted. And for those less invested in the politics of it all, it became a simple masterclass in delivering a decisive line at exactly the right time. In the end, the lasting impact wasn't just about who won the exchange, it was about how the moment highlighted the dynamics of live conversation under the spotlight. Jasmine's restraint, Ivanka's visible recalibration, the audience's unfiltered response, and the viral life of the clip all combined to create a sequence that will be remembered long after other political soundbites fade. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the midst of carefully staged debates, a single unscripted sentence can shift the balance, capture the public's attention, and leave a mark that no amount of planning can